Okay, thank you very much for joining us for this live episode of In Conversation. My name is Dr. Karl Devincenzi. I'm the School's Relation Manager at the University of Exeter. I'm joined by Katherine Lloyd Clark, who's our Assistant Director. Hi, Katherine.
Hi, Karl. Nice to see you again.
Likewise. And obviously, we're mad enough to do this for the second time live, so for a live edition. So we didn't get put off by the first time round, which is fantastic. Katherine, we have a few sort of topics that we want to talk about today. And we want to just explore some sort of issues. And obviously, the sort of topical one and the sort of one that the most logical one to talk about is admissions. And in relation to that, last week was the Equal Consideration Date, which is a key milestone for both applicants and for universities alike. So what can we say about what we've seen in terms of trends, applications, numbers that have come through up until that point?
Well, Karl, I'm really pleased to say that it's been a very positive cycle across the autumn of last year and into the early spring of this year for Exeter. We've seen significant undergraduate home application volume increases, and coming up to that equal consideration date, we saw those batches get bigger and bigger, and really have landed just short of about 19% higher than our volume last year, which is amazing news for us. It gives us a lot of work to do now across the next few weeks. But so we're up for home applications. We're up also really pleasingly for applications from the EU, which now fall within our international category, of course. But the non-EU international are also doing really, really well. And we're outstripping the volume growth that we're seeing for our competitors and the rest of the sector, although both of those are also a little bit up in most of those categories. So really, really good positive picture, Karl, for Exeter.
And you talk about this increase, 19% increase. I'm guessing that's overall across our entire course portfolio. So
yes.
There'll be, and as you tend to have with these things, there'll be some spikes in some areas and some not so much, but that is an average of 19% overall.
Yes, it is. Really, in terms of kind of volume, our big drivers for change there are in areas like business and management, law doing really, really well, but also we're seeing subjects allied to medicine, which for us would be the newly retitled biomedical sciences programme, for example, and areas like neuroscience in that category. Engineering doing really well, but also pleasingly in the humanities side of things, we're seeing a real resurgence for history, which is fantastic. I'm a historian by background, and we always need more historians. Fantastic ability to cope with uncertainty and gaps in the data. So I'm really, really pleased to see history doing so well as well. There are areas which are a little bit more challenging, but none of them would be any surprise to anyone who's been managing recruitment in the sector for a while. Areas like modern languages, which, generally speaking, are a bit of a challenge, but we have a very healthy applicant pool there, and we recruit a large cohort of modern linguists, which we're really committed to continuing to do. So those are some of the highlights, really. And I guess the underlying thread there, Karl, would be leaving aside that kind of history element, we're seeing a real vote for vocationally oriented provision, programs that will lead to a fairly defined vocational job outcome, possibly.
And Katherine, some of the teachers and advisors on the call today will be thinking that's great for the university, fantastic, but actually what does it mean for my applicant? What does it mean for my student? Does this mean that it's all becoming much more competitive to get onto the courses? Will students find it that little bit harder to get a place this year?
So there, I think I would stress again, as I have done before, that Exeter is traditionally a really significant recruiter of undergraduate students. We give an amazing undergraduate student experience, and we put our heart and soul into doing that at really sizable volumes. So we have some big targets, and as a result of having big targets, we can make a lot of offers. So I would very much say that we continue to be a very accessible Russell Group choice for applicants. Coming up to the equal consideration deadline, we were actually ahead of last year in terms of the volume and the proportion of offers made. So we had been working really, really quickly to get those offers out there. And we're really excited to see lots of year 13 and parents chatting away on social media, saying that they'd had their Exeter offers and weren't we quick and things like that. So I think up until that equal consideration date, all was going great guns, Karl. Of course, with those large batches coming in around the deadline, my admissions team's got a lot of work to do, and it will take us a little while to get through some of those large batches. We do aim to do our processing really by the end of March, but I would hope very much that people will be hearing from us in advance of that in the majority of cases. We do have some disciplines, particularly in those kind of accounting, business management type areas, where we're having to just sit tight and do a bit of a stock take on the numbers. So if applicants have applied to those kind of areas, they may be waiting a little bit longer, but we will be getting back to everybody in really good time.
So and one of the questions I wanted to sort of explore in a second was in terms of that timeline, what happens next and when sort of applicants should hear from us. We're kind of expecting to be able to inform most, if not all applicants. You kind of mentioned that end of March as a sort of
yes,
heading towards that.
Yes, I mean, many advisors, if they've been around a while like me, will remember that we always used to have that kind of end of March type approach for getting back to people, and we've typically tried to stick to that at Exeter, even though candidates, have until early June really to reply to their offers. But we will be getting those offers out as soon as we possibly can, ideally by the end of March, in order to give people the opportunity to book on to one of our offer holder visit days, which take place in late February and on throughout March. So we really do hold to that as much as we possibly can. And if there's any reason why we're waiting past the end of March, generally it's because we're waiting further information, what we would call a further information request, which will have gone to the applicant, occasionally the school or the referee, but the applicant will typically know that we're waiting for something from them if we're having to hold their decision past that end of March date.
Okay. Katherine, obviously, one of the sort of feedback we get from teachers and advisors is very much that students at the moment are faced with lots of different choices. They can go for progression to HE. There is the whole going to employment, direct employment. There is what you can call the middle sort of line, which is the degree apprenticeships, which is kind of employment degree merged into one, going for that. We're obviously a supplier of degree apprenticeships, and are we seeing an increase in the number of applications, bearing in mind that that cycle is very different to the UCAS cycle, so it doesn't follow a set pattern, but are there any trends emerging?
It is very different, Karl, and it's difficult to compare the two data sets because the dynamics are very, very different. But what I would definitely endorse is that sense that employment-based higher education study is popular. Our degree apprenticeships are doing really, really well. We've got a really large cohort of nearly 100 for our applied finance programme for January starts, and applications for the April round there are already ramping up. So those are very popular routes and very, very well worth diving into for applicants who perhaps do want that more professional start to their studies, perhaps, and don't feel necessarily drawn to the more kind of residential campus-based undergraduate provision. So very popular, and again, you know, I guess on the finance side of things, as well as digital technology solutions, those kind of finance and digital spheres are doing well in degree apprenticeships, as they are for our campus-based provision.
Okay. Katherine, I want to move on to, obviously last week we sort of saw the news and saw that there was sort of news items, and a particular institution was proposing to perhaps sort of close down some courses, etc. And whereas that's not a common thing that happens across institutions, it does happen, and it's something that sort of does happen across the sector. And I guess there's two questions that I want to explore here. The first is perhaps the cause for this, what is sort of motivating and driving that. But the second is exploring what happens to the student, the applicant, when those things do happen, when there is a proposal for a course closure, and perhaps they're part of that, and they're thinking about sort of pursuing that sort of career or that course. Where does that leave the applicant themselves?
I guess I'd like to start, Karl, by just emphasising for teachers and advisors that no university will want to be putting students in a difficult position at any stage of their studies, and these decisions are never taken lightly. I think the underlying causes of the situation in the sector are quite well rehearsed at the moment. We're seeing a situation where inflationary pressures are very, very significant. Increased employer national insurance has added to that pressure significantly, and enormous volatility in terms of international student markets, both in terms of currency fluctuations in key markets, but also kind of changing aspirations and demographics in some of those key student markets, like China, for example, all of which is really encouraging the sector to kind of look again at its strategic planning, really. I would be relatively reassuring, though. I don't think this is a context where applicants or parents should panic or adjust their plans or intentions significantly at this stage, because all institutions of higher education in the UK are, or those of us that charge fees in the normal way, if you like, are regulated by the Office for Students. We have student protection plans in place. We have to. That's part of our conditions for registration. And we are all very well used to putting student best interests, you know, first and foremost in our planning. So it really would be very rare, Karl, for an institution to close a course partway through, for example. Generally speaking, we would aim to do something called teaching out, which is where we might close a course to students applying, but we would see through the cohorts that we've already recruited. There's always some change in a programme catalogue at any institution, Exeter included. We sometimes rename a course and we close the old name and start with a new name. Exeter's position in this regard is really stable at the moment, and there aren't really any thoughts at the moment that I'm aware of around disciplines changing, closing, those sorts of worries. And I would suggest that people are really cautious in respect of the things they're reading about other institutions who will also be working really hard to look after their students really carefully.
Yeah, okay. The final topic I want to cover is in terms of you've had students who've sort of applied, you had students who've now submitted their application through UCAS, and sort of many teachers and advisors may be thinking, hang on a second, I've done the teacher reference, I've now submitted my information to sort of universities. What happens if I need to tell them anything else? I want to tell them more. What happens if there are a change in educational experience in the next, or family experience, or whatever it is over the next few months? And of course, the universities are still very much open to receive information, etc. So from our point of view, we have our extenuating circumstances sort of form. I wonder whether we can talk a little bit about what does that do and how does that work in terms of that extenuating circumstances form?
Yes. So anything of that kind that affects an applicant individually, that we might need to know about, for example, a severe illness that affects them in the preparation for their exams, or any other major instability, should be notified to us as soon as possible via that extenuating circumstances form. And I would suggest that advisors look for anything similar at the other universities that individual has applied to as well. So liaising direct with the relevant admissions offices once the UCAS application's gone in is probably the most effective way of dealing with a situation like that. In our case, what we will do is copy that information essentially onto our electronic file for the student, and flag on that electronic file that the student has got extenuating circumstances. And that means that when we come to consider summer results, if we need to, we will take another look at that application, when the results come in. Sometimes there's no need because the students actually met the conditions of the offer, and then it's information that might be relevant onward for the student support framework, but it doesn't affect the academic decision. Sometimes those circumstances may have contributed to a near miss of one or more of the conditions, in which case, if we have the scope in terms of numbers management, we may operate some flexibility. And we look at every single one of those cases carefully and individually. And I can really, say that hand on heart, because I know how diligent my admissions team are at looking at those during the very busy summer results phase. So it's very well worth doing. But please, teachers and advisors, don't leave those extend circs forms until after the exam phase. We need that information as early as possible.
And that form is available on our website, so teachers and advisors can go into the website and sort of complete that. But actually, in reality, it doesn't necessarily have to be the teachers and advisors. It could be anybody supporting that applicant who can submit those circumstances on that form too.
It can. We're really flexible. It can be the applicant, it can be a parent, it can be a medical professional, or some schools prefer to do that in support themselves.
That's great. I can see we've got quite a few people joining us so today live. If you do have any questions, please feel free to type them out. I can read them as I'm talking. So please do feel free to do that. The final bit in terms of looking at, I guess we've described the timeline, we described the cycle, we've thought about what could come ahead. Looking at the current year 12s, I guess, is the final bit. Based on the sort of numbers that we've seen applying, etc., is there any sort of advice that we can provide the new cohort coming through in terms of opportunities that may arise for them next year?
I would guess, Karl, that next cycle, golly, it'll be 2026 entry, won't it? I can't believe it. Where's the decade going? But I think, again, I can't see anything changing in the kind of, if you like, the macro factors out there in the wider landscape that would drive a very different approach to selection next year. In other words, I think we'll still have lots and lots of opportunity at Exeter. I think we'll still have some, some really big targets to meet, which is great for you, for all of your students. It means lots of opportunity. We are very much kind of trying to kind of gear ourselves up, if you like, to meet demand where there is demand. So, you know, over the last couple of years, we've made more places available in our wonderful business school, for example. We've been growing areas like psychology. So unlike some universities which may want to keep their most selective courses really, really tight, we've actually tried to make more opportunity available to meet that demand, even in those very competitive disciplines. So I think students should aim to study what they love, what they really, really enjoy, and what they're going to be good at. And I'm really confident that we'll have some wonderful opportunities for them to do that at Exeter. And I'm really thankful for all the support teachers and advisors give their students in exploring Exeter, because it really is the most wonderful place to live, to work, to study, to be. There's nothing better than the West Country, in my view. However you put your cream or jam on your scone, it's still an amazing place to be. And we really want as many of you as possible to come and have a look.
Now, Katherine, with campuses on both counties, we have to sit on the fence here. We can't make an allegiance on one or the other in terms of how we do that.
I'm cream agnostic.
Katherine, we're going to finish now. A huge thank you to those who joined us today, and a huge thank you to yourself for sort of answering the questions that we've been posing. We are back on the 10th of March, so we're doing another live session on the 10th of March at 4 p.m. So please do join us then. But otherwise, if you do have any queries, questions, please do get in touch with us. If you go to our teachers' website, our contact details are on there, alongside a lot of a plethora of resources and downloadable materials you can have for teachers and advisors. But a massive thank you, and we will see you in March. Thank you for joining us.